guest this evening is Sam Baltrusis. He's been on before. It's always great to have him on. And his websites are bostonhaunts.com, cambridgehaunts.com. And Sam Baltrusis, author of Ghosts of Boston and Ghosts of Salem, is editor-in-chief of Spare Change News. In addition to writing books and editing SCN, he teaches journalism at Cambridge Community TV, CCTV, and Malden Access TV, MATV. In the past, he's worked for VH1, MTV.com, Newsweek, WHDH.com, and ABC Radio, and as a regional stringer for the New York Times. He has 2 books slotted for 2016, including Haunted Provincetown and Haunted Boston Harbor. And his books are available on Amazon.com. And please welcome Sam to the show this evening. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Solaris. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Good. It's good to talk to you again.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on. And you know what? It seems like you're really taken off since we've talked last.
Yeah, the Salem book was a hit. So, I mean, we were kind of expecting that, but people really responded to it. So it sold very well, and the other 2 books probably won't have as big of a response as Salem. Salem is an internationally known place, but yeah, I mean, it's been a great journey to where I'm at now.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. Well, let's talk a little bit about your new books. I know they're not live yet, but let's kind of get into what they're about.
Well, I mean, I focus specifically on locations, and Ghost of Salem was just Salem, and I didn't really deviate from that. So my next 2 books are also geo-specific: Haunted Provincetown, which is on the tip of Cape Cod, and then also Haunted Boston Harbor. Haunted Provincetown was actually supposed to be a little later, but I decided to write it earlier because it's in the summer, and I kind of wanted to have an excuse to go to the beach during the summer. So, I've kind of turned my career into making it a vacation as well. So it's been a pleasure going out there doing my research and really getting to know the locals and getting to know the ghosts and the location.
Nice. That sounds awesome. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the adventures you've had with spirits recently?
Yeah, I mean, Salem we talked about, because for me, my writing Ghosts of Salem was, it was very draining for me, because I spend a lot, when I write my books, I spend a lot of time at the location. I get to know every nook and cranny of a city, the history, the ghosts, all the good stuff. And with Provincetown, it's sort of, I've been going to Provincetown for years, so I know it very well. It's a very small strip of land, but it's also where the Pilgrims first came before heading off to Plymouth. So it has a history that goes back 400 years. And it's also a very laid back kind of bohemian type vibe. And the spirits are also reflected in that bohemian vibe. So it's, the spirits are a lot more, I guess, carefree, and the Ghosts of Salem are a lot more kind of vindictive. They're not as nice in Salem and compared to Provincetown.
Right. We kind of touched on that before, which I think is kind of interesting. And once again, I'm wondering if it's amplified by the ritual that goes on in Salem. We kind of talked about that before, but the other areas maybe not as much ritual going on and ceremony. Maybe that's part of it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's the climate in Salem. I think that there's a lot of conjuring going on in there. There's a lot of I would be upset as well if I was a spirit. There's a lot of novices trying to summon ghosts, and there's shops that kind of cater to that. Mm-hmm. And Provincetown is definitely probably equally as haunted as Salem, and just the spirits aren't pissed off.
Nice. That sounds pretty chill then. That sounds like a nice place to go visit.
Yeah, it really is. It's nice. And also, it's equally, there's dark history to it as well. It doesn't go back, a lot of the history they've had a few serial killers and stuff that's lingering from the 70s, because it was kind of a playground for like mobsters and kind of underworld type activities back in the 50s, 60s, 70s.
Mm-hmm, right. And that dark history you talk about, so that kind of radiates insofar as maybe kind of more of a shadowy, anomalous kind of energy, or how does it feel over there?
Yeah. I think, because it's literally the tip, like the tip of the world, So it's sort of like the northernmost point of the United States. So it has sort of like an end of the world feeling to it, but it's also magical too. I think that people who want to get away, they gravitate to Provincetown. Like they want to they want to feel, I guess, welcome. And a lot of creative types have gone there, and we have like Eugene O'Neill and Tennessee Williams, and a lot of famous playwrights that's where they went to be inspired. And you have beautiful beaches and just the overall vibe to it. It's a magical place, but it's also very haunted. And what's different than Salem, in Salem, it's part of the vernacular of when you walk down the streets, you talk to people about ghosts, and it's pretty common. Provincetown, people are, the first thing they say to me when I ask them again, is this any experience with ghosts here? And they're like, oh, it's very, very haunted, and they refuse to talk anymore about it. So it's kind of like that. To keep what happens in Provincetown stays in Provincetown, and that also includes the ghosts too. So they don't really talk about the ghosts, so it's kind of difficult for people to go on the record, which is typical New England. But Salem, people talk freely.
Right, yeah, they're more calibrated for it. So what types of ghosts are in Provincetown, or what kind of stories can you tell us? Are they in and out? I mean, does anybody really witness anything? Have you been able to grasp any real data? It sounds like people are kind of cloaked insofar as the information goes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ghost lore. I go into they have cryptids. There was a black flash there, and I generally stay away from cryptids, but the black flash was so interesting. It was a kind of like a Jeepers Creepers type creature that was a part of Provincetown's lore back turn of the century, like 1900s. And, I did some research on that, but the ghost lore, there's a lot of recurring motifs. You always have like a ghost girl, and you always have, but the ones that really creep me out are related to, there was a serial killer, Tony Costa. He is known as Tony Chop Chop. And he, the first place I ever stayed in Provincetown was called the Victoria House, and it's on Standish Street. And it's weird that I always kind of, without even knowing the backstory to a location, I somehow magically end up at those places. And the first place I've ever stayed at was at the Victoria House. And it was actually in the room where he stayed while he was murdering these women.
Oh.
So, yeah. And so the ghost lore there was pretty creepy. And I definitely had a vibe, that something was not right. Mm-hmm. And it turns out people didn't know that he lived there. Doing some research, that I actually uncovered that, it was in the late 60s, and it was kind of trumped by what was happening with Charles Manson. So it would have been the big story of the 60s if the Manson case didn't happen, because it was horrific what happened to those women that he killed. And also, he, it's possible because he actually met the women at what is now the Victoria House, and it's actually closed right now for being repaired. But it's possible that he actually kept them in that place and then buried them in Truro.
That's interesting. Wow. Yeah. And it was the real room? You stayed in the real room he was in?
Yeah, it was the same room. It was room 4. Okay. I actually, the first time I was there, because I'm a journalist, so I was on assignment there for a magazine, and they're like, the only place we have open is the Victoria House, and I'm like, okay. So they put me up in this room, and I couldn't sleep, and I just had a bad feeling, and I asked to be moved, and it turns out that's the room he stayed in.
Wow, and they don't advertise that, I guess.
It's like hidden. A lot of New England. There's a lot of whitewashing what really happened in our past.
Mm-hmm. I guess you have to bring luminol in there, huh? I don't even think that would help.
Yeah. Really. Well, yeah. I mean, they did. When you look into the investigation, they did find clues to the crimes, and he basically, it was horrible what happened to these. Like, he took out their hearts, he had dismembered them, and there was a garden that he buried all the women, at least 2 women that we know of, but it could be more, in a shallow grave in North Truro. And yes, they actually found what could be not human remains, but clues that were tied to the murders in his room.
Mm-hmm. Wow. It's interesting, of course, when people get murdered and when they transfer out in general, there's usually a portal of some kind that's been opened up, especially in a situation like that. Did you notice anything? You said you had a creepy feeling, but what else did you pick up on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very sensitive. So I felt like look in the closet. Like that's what it was, like this feeling of, and I didn't necessarily have an experience, but I did feel like there was definitely anti-women. Like there was something that was a guy that was against women, and I felt like look in the closet, and it turns out that's where the evidence was found, like the same closet that I was kind of led to.
Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah, you picked up on a psychic signature or imprint of some kind. Yeah, that's pretty good radar you have there. Yeah, that's creepy as all you know what as hell. He reminds me of Jack the Ripper, this character, insofar as the way he was, the way you're describing his behavior, that kind of serial killer mentality. I wonder if he was trying to emulate him to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely ties to Jack the Ripper, and I think that he was tied to 2 murders, but I think that there definitely were more women that he murdered.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So you didn't get any boogies following you home after that incident with the room, did you?
No, I mean, this was early on in my paranormal. So this was like 2007, and I was on assignment, and I kept when I would stay at that hotel, because I kind of stay all over. I've stayed at different places. It really depends on the price, really, and it's kind of a reasonably priced place because it was a flop house for many years, and I would go back, but I would say, please do not put me in room 4. And, sometimes that was the only room that was open. So I would still put me in that one room. And then I didn't really find out about the whole Tony Chop Chop story until last year. So it was, I just knew it was bad and I didn't know why.
Right. So apparently they don't have to let anybody know something like that's going on in the hotel. Let me ask you something real quick. This doesn't really pertain to that, but when they're selling a haunted house out there and somebody's died in the house, do they have to disclose that information?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that if they were selling it, yeah, but if they were like renting it out as a room, no, because I'm actually friends with the guy that became the house manager of that hotel, and he didn't even know the whole backstory to it.
Wow.
So I'm assuming that when they sell it, because I think they're about to sell that house, so they probably do have to give the backstory to it.
Oh, absolutely. I would think so. And insofar as the hotel goes, do they have anomalous activity insofar as spirits or ghosts besides that room? Is there something that goes on, anything strange, like a poltergeist?
Yeah, I mean, because my friend who stayed there, I mean, obviously Provincetown is like a very much a summer destination. So you have a very small population during the winter that stay year round. So it's of course creepier in the winter and the fall than it is in the summer because there's more people. My friend who was the house manager, he stayed downstairs and he didn't even know the backstory of Tony Chop Chop, and he told me all sorts of things like hearing screams, like women screaming. We first thought that it had something to do with like a sort of a clinic for women, like maybe a abortion clinic or something like that. We weren't really sure, and then I started doing research, and then I found out about Tony Chop Chop.
Wow. That's pretty wild. Yeah, that's very creepy in general. And what about the ghost girl? What's she about?
Well, that's something I just encountered. I mean, there's a place called the Gifford House, and that's where I stayed this past weekend. I try actually not to stay at haunted hotels and bed and breakfasts, but I always end up at the one that is. Okay. And so I was going to stay at the Carpe Diem, which is supposedly very haunted, and it was a former funeral parlor in Provincetown. And then I said, I'm just going to go to the Gifford House because I just want to not be in a haunted hotel or bed and breakfast this weekend. And of course it's haunted, and there's supposedly a girl that hangs out in the there's a piano bar area downstairs, and she supposedly peeks around the piano and loves the piano when people play. And a lot of the spirits in Provincetown, they're not negative spirits. I mean, of course the Tony Chop Chop its spirit probably is negative, but a lot of them are positive.
Right. Yeah. So is that P-Town? Is that what they call P-Town?
Yeah, it's P-Town, Provincetown, yeah.
Right. Okay, I've been there a long, long time ago. I vaguely remember it, but yeah, now that's what they called it. That's what I remember it being called. But okay, so it's the same area. I didn't realize it was that haunted. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, there's also there's the case involving the lady of the dunes. It goes back to the 70s, and actually I did a story because I write for newspapers and magazines in addition to writing ghost stories, and I teach journalism. And I did a story on the Lady of the Dunes, and she's been unidentified for years. And there's a woman who claims that she she had ties. She actually saw the mutilated woman, and this is actually a few years after Tony Chop Chop, and she feels like that it's potentially Whitey Bulger, the gangster, is the one who killed or was responsible for the woman, known as the Lady of the Dunes.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Is that guy, did he get killed? That Whitey, whatever his name is?
No, Whitey Bulger is still incarcerated. He was found. He was on the run. He was the FBI's most wanted for years. Okay. The movie The Departed was based on his life. He's known as the Winter Hill Gang, which is my neighborhood. I live in Somerville, which is right by Winter Hill.
Wow.
And he did a lot of his deeds in South Boston. And Whitey Bulger was a really nefarious gangster in this area. And they're doing a movie, Black Mask, with Johnny Depp coming out, I think, this coming fall.
Really? That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Well, anything with Johnny Depp is usually pretty decent, so that's cool.
Yeah, and I've seen the trailers for Black Mask, and it looks like he did a really fantastic job in kind of capturing the essence of Whitey Bulger.
Right. Well, of course, it seems like a dark storyline nonetheless. And it's really interesting, with all that kind of activity where people lose their lives in such a tragic way, you have to, obviously there are ghosts and spirits. I mean, obviously they don't have any rest. There's no inner peace, even if people are praying for them. I would suspect there has to be residual imprinting somewhere where they were taken out.
Yeah, I mean, I even with like the Lady of the Dunes, she was calling me, and I felt like I had to tell her story. So I don't necessarily know if she's like her ghost is walking the dunes where her body was dumped. But I think that spirits reach out to people who are sensitive, myself included, mm-hmm. and they want their story to be told. And it's very important to me. And the woman that she's a writer, also she's an author named Sandra Lee. She is going on the record now about her experiences and sort of her theory that Whitey Bulger was the one that was part of what happened. And she was also kind of summoned by this girl too. And we had dreams, and sometimes the spirits call you to tell their story.
Mm-hmm. Is that how she came to you? Was it in a dream, or is it through some kind of telepathy?
It was in a dream. It was in a dream for Sandra as well. Like she said she had a dream, and I had a dream. I was kind of called to do the story, and I don't necessarily know if there wasn't any closure involved, but there's a lot of stuff that I think that people don't want others to know, whether it was police involvement or, in fact, Whitey Bulger, if you said anything negative or accused him of any crime, you ended up dead. So there's still a lingering fear when it comes to anything related to him.
Right. It certainly sounds like it. And it's interesting because once your psychic antenna is switched on, it seems like these spirits really do kind of seek beings like you out to relay the data. And I can understand that to some degree, because if there's something that was omitted or if there's information that's lost, they want to use somebody as a medium to communicate the information.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty common for me, and sometimes I try to tune it out because especially if it's something that could put me in danger. And I was actually really scared to do this story, but I was also very passionate to tell her story because
right.
we still don't have a name for her. And she's, it's been a cold case for 30 years now. And so it's one of those stories that I would like to at least to find out what her name was and what her backstory is. Mm-hmm. So she can have closure. She can go to the light.
Right. Well, can't they do kind of a DNA scan and find something pertaining to her identity?
They have, and the thing is, we don't know. There've been many leads over the years as to like what really happened to her. The theory is that this is pretty common in the Winter Hill Gang and Whitey Bulger's rings. He would basically get women who came over from Ireland when they came into South Boston and basically turn it into human trafficking. Mm-hmm. So that was pretty common. So we think that perhaps she was a woman who came over from Ireland or from another country and was possibly somehow involved with human trafficking.
Right. Sounds like it for sure. Well, that's quite the mystery right there. What comes to mind is I'm sure you're probably familiar with this when people say they see spirits on the road at night when they're driving and they see these shadowy, ominous figures kind of crossing away, one direction to the next, and then they disappear. Have you encountered anything like that?
I have, yeah. I mean, I definitely, that's with her spirit. I mean, I haven't seen her spirit, but I've heard people say that they've seen it on the dunes near the location where her body was found.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen it, and my thoughts are always like, my first instinct is as a skeptic, and I'm like, could it just be how the light reflects off of a grave? Like when I grew up, grew up in Florida until I moved to Boston in 1990, and there was a cemetery when every time you drove by, it looked like a spirit would kind of walk by, and and I'm like, it could just be from the car lights reflecting on the gravestones, but yeah, I mean, I personally have seen that, and I try to first debunk it, and then I go, maybe it's actually something there, which, there's a situation in Boston where I encountered what looked like a girl in the cemetery, and I call her Mary, and she was, it could have been fog, but it to me, or it could have been a light anomaly, but to me, it looked like it was a full body apparition.
Well, that's pretty interesting. And the difference. I mean, your sensors are out there, and you can tell the difference between, mist or something else that looks like a spirit or a ghost, in my opinion. So how often do you go to the haunted? Are they haunted cemeteries first of all, or are they just places you like to investigate?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like the cemetery that I try not to spend too much. Like it's like I don't really personally feel like that people don't necessarily, like the spirits don't necessarily go to the cemetery and like are bound to the cemetery. I think that the spirits visit the cemetery, but what I do use the cemeteries for is like every gravestone has a story, so I kind of let the gravestones tell me the story of the people. I'm really passionate about telling the stories of those who have passed, and so I sometimes go to the cemetery more for inspiration. Like I just went to the cemetery in Provincetown, and I was looking for one more story. And I was drawn to this woman, Viola Cook, and it turns out there's a whole back. So kind of let the spirits guide me. And I used cemeteries or old historic burial grounds to guide me, with my writing. So Viola Cook was actually a woman who potentially is maybe a spirit. So like that may be some of the ghost lore involved in Provincetown. And so I just literally stumbled on her grave, and it kind of led to this whole story that needs to be told.
Nice. Yeah. There's always a reason when you enter those things. I didn't attend this ritual, but I know that of some people that did a crossing ritual in a cemetery, and everything just went haywire. And it wasn't a haunted cemetery, supposedly, but I think what it was is I'm pretty sure a lot of those beings have already crossed over rather. And I don't know what they were doing, but things just went completely haywire. And I was really glad because they invited me to go, and I just said no. I just had a radar not to go. And there was a reason for that. So, but yeah, you never know what you're going to conjure up at places like that. And I think when you go in with grace and you're respectful to the environment, then the spirits are less apt to get a little annoyed.
Yeah, for me, the scariest thing I've ever really encountered in the cemetery are animals. I mean, when I was in the same cemetery. Actually, I was looking for. There's the Lady of the Dunes. There's a marker, and it says, Jane. It's like an unmarked grave with her remains. I was trying to find it just because I felt like I needed to find it. And I ran into a fox in the middle of the cemetery. So I've had more encounters with living creatures as opposed to ghosts in cemeteries. But I did have an encounter in Boston at this burying ground with a girl who I think she's a poltergeist, and she's pretty regular in that cemetery, which is kind of our paupers cemetery in Boston.
Oh, that's really interesting. Have you ever come across, you talk about the living creatures, have you ever come across anything that looks more paranormal, like a familiar in a graveyard, maybe something that was conjured up as a shapeshifter?
Yeah, that's the word that you said, because I've been talking a lot about that lately. I had a friend who lives in P-Town, and he's another one of those people who doesn't want to go on the record, but he's having encounters with ghost cats, in the basement, and he's like, the cats, he has a cat that was upstairs, but the ghost cat was downstairs. Mm-hmm. And so ghost cats and ghost dogs are pretty common. We even have ghost horse on my tour in Boston at the Old South Meeting House. But yeah, familiars. I'm thinking a lot about that because I think like spirit animals and that sort of thing, I feel very connected to. Like at Ravenstar, I feel really connected to the raven myself as a spirit animal, and
Nice.
I think that that certain animals are connected to to their owners, and I think that's the case definitely in Salem and potentially in Provincetown as well.
Right. They're definitely messengers without a doubt. Yeah, Raven is one of my totems. That's a long story behind that. But yeah. And it's really interesting how it gets really ominous insofar as the path of the mystic and the symbolism behind animals and spirits and I think the ghost cats, now that sounds like just an animal that's transferred out but maybe has an attachment to the person in the home, or is it the person's lost animal that transferred out?
Yeah, I mean, there's different situations. Every situation's different. I think the situation with, we have two in Provincetown. We have many in Salem. I think that there may be familiars in Salem because it was a pretty common motif in Salem that like cats that were not cats there, or that they. So I think that is probably more the case in Salem. Provincetown, there is a cat of a gentleman who passed at it's called the Rose and Crown, who still inhabits the hotel, and it was his cat. And usually the cat stays behind for his owner, but his owner passed as well. So it's kind of weird for both the owner and the ghost cat to stick around. Mm-hmm. That's kind of that's sort of rare. But yeah, I mean, I like when it comes to like familiars and actual animals, I'm a big believer in animals telling me a story. So if I see a fox, I feel I listen to it.
Mm-hmm. Right, they're medicine. Well, just like deer is, that's very sacred too. That's for healing. If they're basically a gift when you see them out in nature. In my opinion, that's why I really tune into nature in general, because they have a lot to communicate that people don't pick up on, for sure. Yeah. Have you ever come across any stories about winged shapeshifters? Anything that flies? I don't want to say Mothman, but something in that realm.
Yeah, and it's weird that's what the Black Flash is.
Black Flash?
The Black Flash in Provincetown is the cryptid that was like Jeepers Creepers or like the Mothman prophecies. I actually had an experience. I was there on Halloween, and of course, Halloween, Provincetown is number 2 in Massachusetts for tourists visiting the city on Halloween. So it's a major Halloween destination. And I was there last Halloween. The weather wasn't so great, and it was pretty like in awe with all the costumes and the pageantry involved with Halloween in Provincetown versus my experiences with Halloween in Salem, which were 2 different experiences completely. But there was what looked like kind of like a bat. I think it's a man, or I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman dressed up as something similar to that. But what kind of freaked me out was the person. It looked so realistic, and I actually kind of got up close and personal to it. There was no way that could have been a costume, and the head was so small compared to the body, and it was just kind of. I'm not saying that I saw a cryptid, but it kind of opened my eyes to the idea that maybe that they do exist. And I don't know. It was just one of those situations that it still kind of haunts me seeing this creature that could have been a costume. I hope that was a costume and not not the Mothman or not Jeepers Creepers.
Mm-hmm, right. What's interesting? Well, I always say if you can create it on this dimensional space in a form of consciousness or even in a physical formula, it can exist in another dimensional space, even if it's not permanent. And it goes out and
right.
There's a resonance wave, and there's alternate realities and alternate dimensional spaces. So it sounds to me like, I mean, I don't discount anything. I believe anything is possible through consciousness and intent personally. And when you're doing ritual, and even though these people are not necessarily doing ritual on what I call Samhain Halloween, there's still energy out there that they could be tuning into. There are shapeshifters that can happen. There are things that can be tuning into them and actually taking them over to some degree. I've heard and seen people who are not into the craft actually get taken over during that timeline because of the veils. First of all, the veils are very thin, and secondly, because it's just they're opening and they're embracing any kind of entity that wants to connect in and descend and maybe have a fun time. So that happens often. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, like my experience, and I'm a little wary to, obviously people that listen to your show are kind of similar spirits in regards to what they believe in. But for me, I kind of weary to but I did, whatever I experienced was definitely something that I can't explain, because I really got close enough to see that what I thought was a costume may have been something else.
Right. That's really interesting. Well, I have heard stories of in the old New England area where there are different kinds of cryptoids, I guess, and things that are, who knows what kind of dimensional spaces they come in and out of. What about Bigfoot, Sasquatch?
Yeah.
Any
I mean,
stories about that?
no, I mean, there's really not a Bigfoot. I actually just came back from the Northwest where the Bigfoot is pretty common. But yeah, I mean, not really in New England, but we all have, we have other versions. Like there's a cat-like cryptoid that is in Truro, which is right next to Provincetown, and it's there's definitely variations of different types of bizarre animals and things that could not be animals that have been spotted throughout New England. But but I for the most part, I generally focus just on ghost lore.
Mm-hmm.
But as you probably know, the more and more you get into it, you kind of get led to other dimensions like ufology and like cryptoids and all that fun stuff. So
Right.
yeah, I tend to focus just on the ghost lore. But in this book, there's several UFO encounters in Provincetown because mainly in Truro, which is a lot more desolate compared to Provincetown, and it's very interesting. There was a huge movement in that area like 20 years ago with people who had encounters in Truro.
Mm-hmm. With UFOs?
Yeah, with UFOs.
Wow.
Go ahead. Yeah, but there was a lot of lost time there, so the people would have experiences sort of the lost time phenomenon. And I'm not an expert in this field, but it's been interesting learning. I actually went to the location where there's a gentleman who had an experience. It was kind of the beginning of the lost time where you're gone for 2 hours and you can't account for that 2 hours that was missing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you do regressive therapy and you go under hypnosis and you actually reveal this whole experience within a UFO.
Right. That's very interesting. Well, I think that is all based on frequency, in my opinion. I think that people are getting somehow they're navigating into another dimensional gateway, and to me, it seems like it just changes the dynamic in dimensional space. And of course, the UFOs would probably appear under those circumstances with the frequency. And I think it's all about frequency. Personally, that's just my own take on it. But it's fascinating. Did they ever describe what kind of UFOs? I mean, did they ever give you a good description?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. The two people that were involved, the main guy has passed, but I just wanted to go to the location, and I wasn't even sure I was going to include it in my book. But it was called Dutro's Market. It's now called the Salty Market in North Truro, and kind of just retracing what his story was because he was on Unsolved Mysteries back in, I think, in the 70s or 80s. The gentleman who had this experience that he describes. And it's still kind of in the beginnings of the research on this, but of course the book is due August 1st, so I have to kind of be quick on adding this last chapter.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think it was sort of a typical scenario. He was at a payphone, he was calling, he was in the military, he was dropped off at this location, and 2 hours passed and he was back at the location, didn't know what happened, and he was taken into a ship. He saw something kind of descend, and it was a ship, and he found himself inside, and they did, according to his memory, during hypnosis, they did experiments on him.
Wow, that's interesting. And he was military, huh?
Yeah,
exactly. That always gives you a red flag because they have a lot of covert experimentation that goes on. So always interesting.
Yeah.
So your book is due August 1st, which is right around the corner.
I know, it's like next week.
Goodness, you better get cranking there.
Yeah. Well, it's almost done. I decided because I was going to not include anything extra, but I always have a tendency. There's always that one last story that I want to fit in at the last minute. So I think I'm going to add that story into the book.
Yeah, definitely do that. And do you ever think about putting a documentary together in correlation with your books?
Yeah, I've been approached to do TV shows, and you and I were talking a little earlier about that. I have a television production background in addition to journalism and writing, and I've always been wary of going on TV doing sort of like paranormal expert type gigs. I've been asked to do several of them. The only way I would probably do it is if I actually was the producer or the one in charge. And I kind of stayed away from video just mainly because I've been focusing more on writing, and I've kind of got back into my passion for telling a story through video. So I'm definitely interested in the near future. I'm just not sure when or like if it's going to happen like next few years. But I think that it's probably in my future. Absolutely.
Yeah, you can always do a self-produced documentary too if you don't want people to mess with a storyline, which of course they're notorious for doing. So yeah, I don't blame you for that. But your books are great. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely, because I did cast for a couple of shows since we talked last, and you know, and there, of course, people want to necessarily make me the star of this because I don't feel comfortable being. I would rather just be like the expert who comes in and gives sort of expert commentary to why a place would be haunted. I don't necessarily want to be the star of the show, and so I mean, I would feel comfortable doing something like that. But I also I'm interested in collaborating with people who have done it and done it well. And you know, it's pretty rare. From what I've seen, I rarely watch television, but I do think a few people do get it, the paranormal, like the paranormal TV shows do get it right. I'm not a paranormal investigator, so I don't necessarily know if I want to spend like hours in a haunted location,
Right?
because I've done that before and it's not fun.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'd rather just kind of come in and say, okay, and give my 2 cents on why the place is haunted and kind of read the location, which I'm really good at. I can read a location pretty well as far as the psychometry of the location and the vibes that are there, and then leave. So that's what I would like to do, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, it sounds like you have a very fine-tuned antenna, which is really good, and you have a natural gift, which of course is very special. And sometimes when they have the mainstream, that I don't think a lot of those guys are really that gifted. I think it's all about the technology they bring with them and the equipment, and things buzzing, all the not the wells, but the bells and whistles and all that stuff that they use. And I think sometimes you just walk into a place and you'll be able to scan it if you just kind of center yourself and just walk around the parameters of the property and inside. So at least that's been my experience anyway.
Yeah, that's how I write my books. I mean, I go to a location without really knowing the ghost lore, and I read a location, and then I'm like, this place, there's something going on here, like the Victoria House or like various places, and I just know that there's something going on, and then I do the research, and then sometimes I've even had encounters, and sometimes it's just different every location. But I knew, like for the Victoria House where Tony Chop stayed, I knew there was something related to women, and women they were kept there, or something bad happened to women. So I felt very uncomfortable there, and it kind of made my skin crawl. So I wasn't really sure how horrible, it really was, but I knew something was going on there.
Right. And when you leave the area, do you reset your energy field? Does it come with you? Do you have to do anything particular, like a clearing, or does it just dissipate?
Yeah, you can. I come in with the white light around me, and I'm starting to. If you raise your frequency, you can actually detour a lot of negative attachments, which is pretty common in the early stages when you're sensitive. But if you raise your frequency, you can actually kind of, which is, with meditation and the white light of protection and prayer, you can avoid sort of those negative attachments.
Right. Yeah, I agree. It's all about frequency. Absolutely. Not a doubt. And you seem like you've been very psychic since you were a little boy, right?
Yeah, it's been pretty common since I was a kid. My problem for many years is I would take the energy on, and I've learned with experience and time how to kind of not take it on, and kind of bring. And when I would have an attachment, it got pretty negative for me when I was younger, really not knowing what was going on. And now that I know, I'm a little bit more knowledgeable, but I also don't want to be too knowledgeable because I like I like not knowing and kind of going on my senses to guide me, let my senses guide me. And I rely a lot on my intuition when it comes to the paranormal and that sort of thing. So, and I definitely have reached out to shamans, and I've reached out to spiritual people who I trust in regards to cleansing and protecting me.
Mm-hmm. That's a good idea. Yeah, I remember you telling me you were very empathic, or to some extent, the last time I talked to you. Yeah. And of course, I used to be like that too and of course, over the years, I've become more, I don't want to say desensitized, but just a lot of scales on the dragon, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's the process. I mean, I think that when I started getting into, when I first kind of like accepted who I was and that my empathic nature, the more and more you kind of experience it, the more desensitized you become to it, and the more skeptical you become to. I'm definitely a believer, but I haven't had, when I first kind of accepted, my sensitivity, and I've had it when I went from being afraid of the paranormal or things that you can't explain, or spirits, to embracing it. That was a life changer for me, because I was like, you know what, I'm here to tell their story. And then I became passionate about telling their story. And I would have a lot of experiences when I first kind of accepted that sensitivity. And then since then, it's not as common for me now, but I still am very intuitive. So I get what you're saying when it comes to, you get a little hardened to what's around you, and kind of remaining fresh and not necessarily losing that magic that we all have within us.
Right, exactly. And I think there's a calibration involved too as we grow and evolve on the timeline, in our spiritual and on our spiritual paths. And of course, working with energy signatures. I mean, regardless if it's a ghost or not, you're working with energy. That's what you're really doing. You're tuning into the different imprints that are around. And it sounds like you're very good at what you do. I mean, it sounds like you've really been spot on with a lot of your intuition. So that I applaud you for. That's really good.
Yeah, it definitely is something that they're really. I mean, there are books to read on it, but then a lot of it I've learned from other people, and I've also learned within myself to help me handle situations that I didn't know how to handle before. And I think the big thing was viewing, because I was afraid. I was afraid when I would have an experience when I was younger, and going from fear to passion about telling their story. And it kind of had that eureka moment where I'm like, you know what, I'm here to tell their story. That's why I've been made, like, why I'm like this. Mm-hmm. And so when I had that passion of like wanting to tell their story, it's been, I view it now as a gift. And I definitely was afraid of it, had what I call paranormal blinders on for many years.
Right. A lot of people are like that. A lot of people who are just starting to tune in, and they realize that they're psychic and they don't want to see what's going on, and they try to switch it off. But I get the sense that once it's turned on, it's usually there for good, and you just have to learn to deal with it and fine tune it and calibrate it. And of course, people do that eventually. But I do see that a lot. When you were younger, or even now, did you receive a lot of images? Did you get the fast forward moving pictures?
Yeah.
You did?
I mean,
okay.
I definitely, I saw a lot of images. I definitely had, encounters that I can't even explain. I mean, my first experience ever was with my grandfather, that I remember. And then I had an experience with something in my backyard that could have been, a cryptoid. I'm not sure. It was definitely, it looked like it was poking out of the, and so I had some interesting childhood experiences. And then also I would have very prophetic dreams at a very young age for a boy that was 6 and 7, having, these pretty elaborate dreams at such a young age was kind of freakish. I always, looking back on it, I was kind of like Danny from The Shining, from Stephen King's The Shining. I was, right? I mean, if a lot of that, like the psychic residue that's at a location, I was tuning into that. If there were bad things, I would tune into the bad things. If there were good things, I would tune into the good things.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, I call beings like you old souls, and they're just very evolved when they enter onto the timeline, regardless of their size as children. They're still old souls in bodies. And of course, you come with that database of information. It's really fascinating when you think about it. I can remember for myself, I always used to get propulsion and frequencies. I'm very fine-tuned for energy transmission and frequency. And I would get frequency hits and propulsion sounds, and then I would see a bunch of images. And sometimes I would say, I don't want to see this, and I'd switch gears. And this was before I was inducted. It's a long story. But anyways, very interesting, because I think we do have the potential. We can switch things on and off insofar as what we want to choose to look at the timeline. But have you ever received a transmission of sound prior to your image?
Yeah, so you're basically saying like replaying something that happened before, and you're like, you saw it in front of you, or in your head?
What it sounds, it's actually it's in the mind's eye. But what I've noticed is that it's a propulsion sound. It's a frequency. It sounds like a hum, and a propulsion like an engine, and then the images show up. Did you ever have that when you were little?
I mean, that's weird that you say that, because I had a, like a, I would like sort of like read the things that would replay in the mind's eye, but I also had it where I would kind of like go back in time, like I would see something unfold and then I would come back. And like I know what you mean by and that happened a few times when I was a kid, and it could be PTSD related. I'm not sure. I just know that I've had it since I was. I mean, like those type of experiences can give you trauma. I mean, because they're so traumatic, seeing things like, I mean, I saw a couple of things that were kind of scary when I was a kid that I couldn't explain, and trying to tell that to my mother, she had no idea how to deal with me. But I know I haven't really had that kind of experience for many years, but it happened a few times when I was younger. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I can remember even from like my siblings. I mean, they used to see things too, and I think children are naturally psychic. I really do. And of course, growing up in my timeline, we didn't have we didn't have the interference that's going on now with technology. We didn't have all the computer stuff and the interference patterns. So back then there was a little bit more of a I don't want to say natural, but something a little more ominous that's not connected to the artificial intelligence that they have these days. But I was just curious, it's interesting to see what point in the continuum people receive their database of images. And then, of course, you're right, there's a lot of trauma involved when you're not used to seeing things, and all of a sudden they start, popping in, and all these, these big streams of information start connecting in, especially for a child that can be hardcore, I can imagine.
Yeah, and I mean, for one of my first memories of a dream, I was like 6 or 7, and it was apocalyptic. And when I had the dream, and it was very realistic and very mature for someone of my age, and it was kind of like a cautionary tale. I look back on, and I'm surprised that I didn't freak out more than I did, but I just had so many experiences when I was a kid that, my mom always said my son's very sensitive. And I am definitely, I'm a sensitive soul, and I like that about myself, but the sensitivity was more than just being sensitive. It was emotionally, it was sensitive to my surroundings too, and and the spirits and all that stuff. So I was definitely a freakish kid when I was growing up.
You just sound unique and intelligent. Are you a water sign?
No, I'm a Capricorn. I'm an Earth sign.
Yeah,
but I do have Cancer rising, and I have 2 Cancers in a Capricorn.
Okay, yeah, you've got water in there. I figured, yeah, you have to have something there because that's a lot of receptivity that you have. Very interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to talk to you for sure. Have you ever come across some haunted clothing or anything from the colonial time periods? Anything in museums where there's a story behind it?
Well, as I mentioned before, I'm really into psychometry, which is sort of reading the energy of an item or location. And I do think that things can attach itself, and it could be trigger items to a haunting. I have not run across any clothing per se, but I do think that a clothing can be used as a trigger to unleash spirits or energy.
I agree. And with that being said, we're going to be right back. Everybody stay tuned. We're taking a break. Ravenstar Switching Hour.